All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're revisiting the case of the 2011 disappearance of Timothy Pitzen. Once again, this is one that I had heard about years ago, but I decided to kind of explore a little bit more only recently, and we're kind of following the step by step sort of developments, discoveries, and the thought process that's going along with the disappearance of Timothy Pitzen from kind of like a fresh set of eyes on the subject, if you will. Now, what I would have to say about this is a tough missing persons case, and it actually seems somewhat methodical and planned. Right now, we're looking at the article that was placed on Cincinnati.com, and I tried to find some older articles that were written about the case that were prior to the hoax, where a guy came out saying that he was Timothy Pitzen, but in reality that was a hoax, and so many of them are tied to that. But this one from Cincinnati.com mentions the hoax, but it actually has some very kind of elaborate coverage of the original incident. So the thing is, the first thing I would like to say about this is, we mentioned on this channel, like the podcast Thin Air, which did a special about Timothy Pitzen, and they put forward a couple theories. Once again, this is part 3 of it, so we've already gone through the background information. They put forward some possible theories about what could have happened to him, such as, if he did not get murdered by his mother, Amy Fry Pitzen, in that motel room, well, where did he go? Some of them could be he was taken into a religious convent. He could have been taken into a family that lives off the grid, and they don't really have a lot of contact with things outside of rural America. He could have been taken into a family that just homeschools their children and has given him a new name, and it's possible that even at age 6 he could have forgotten his old identity. We mentioned that there's a small likelihood of that, but that is possible. People do forget the identity, or they forget a lot of memories before the age of 6. We can say that much. Now, the thing that I would like to say as a kind of an introductory thing to part 3, once again, this is geared toward people who are somewhat familiar with the case. I was watching a different channel that wasn't talking about true crime cases, but just about how we approach anything in life. And the piece of advice that was given was, it is not advisable to try and prove the unknown with the unknown. And if we apply that to this, it means that we don't know what happened to Timothy Pitzen, right? He has disappeared. That's all we know. He was last seen with his mother, Amy Fry Pitzen. She committed suicide in a motel room by herself. Timothy Pitzen was not there. No physical evidence that he was ever in that motel room. So we don't know what happened to Timothy. Then, that's something that's unknown, right? We don't know what happened to Timothy. Unknown. So then you create a possibility of something that you also do not know that exists. What religious convent would they be talking about? Well, they don't know. It might not even exist. Who is homeschooling him? Well, we don't know. These people might not exist. Who is living off the grid with him? We don't know. They might not exist. What was advised to me is that when you're trying to prove the unknown with the unknown, there is a lower likelihood of it being true. I can follow that type of thinking, but I would just say that in terms of possibility, it could have actually happened that way. Any of those possibilities could have actually happened. The thing with thinking like that, like critical thinking and the logic process, well, sometimes it doesn't stand up to the test of real life. I was also just doing a Google search, and I found this article from Cincinnati.com, but one of the first things that comes up in this sort of autofill is Timothy Pitzen Amish, meaning that one of the theories is that he could have been adopted by an Amish family. Okay, so, once again, there is no real evidence to support that. And the people who are talking about the theories are very clear that it's just speculation. I mean, like, they're not saying they know 100%, and it's not even a diehard theory. They're just giving some possibilities about how Timothy Pitzen could still be alive, even though he is, there's no physical evidence that he is still alive. And I have to say, though, once again, very high likelihood that he was murdered by Amy Fry Pitzen. In this article from Cincinnati.com, they pointed out something that we mentioned in the previous upload. It says just the kind of concept of Timothy's father, Jim, would tell People magazine that he had no clue what was coming. He had no sort of idea that he was going to be encountering any type of behavior like this from Timothy's mother, Amy Fry Pitzen. But then, later on, goes to say that Amy had previously survived a suicide attempt and was taking medication for depression. Now, this is kind of getting away from some of the theories here, but I would just say that there were probably an enormous amount of warning signs that that would have really pointed out that Amy Fry Pitzen, Timothy's mom, would have been in a place that she could have done something destructive to her son. I mean, or even what if she had done something to Jim or to the other family members? I really see an enormous amount of warning signs. But one thing that I would point out as a sort of kind of consistent statement is that it all seems like what they're kind of accusing her of kind of focuses more on Amy doing something to herself. Remember, she committed suicide by overdosing on antihistamines, slitting her wrists, and then later on slitting her throat to kind of finish it off. As, well, nasty as that sounds. But the issue is, those are mostly things that are done to herself, and her family is adamant that Timothy was not murdered. They're just like, she wouldn't do that. And it says in this article, they even put the words loving mother on her tombstone. So their explanation would be that she must have given Timothy away to somebody. And it's very difficult to interpret that type of evidence because we know from the cell phone pings on Amy Fry Pitzen's phone that she had been driving the same route that she did with Timothy at least twice, at least 2 times in her life, like 2 times recently before she ended her life is what I meant to say. She had driven that road. So it's either she chose the absolute most secluded spot where Timothy would never possibly be found if she had him murdered and buried the body. We mentioned that theory put forward by Danielle Hallen that she could have overdosed him on cough syrup and then buried the body because they found cough syrup in the motel room. Or she could have handed him off to somebody. And they have the sediments that are on the tire, so they can kind of get a vague approximation of what county it could have been in where she was driving off-road, but I don't think that's very helpful. There are 2 possible counties in the area, but it could be one of 5 different counties, so it's like I don't really think that that's a very strong lead. Once again, though, a lot of people are really just going with the pathway that Timothy was indeed murdered by his mother, and it's some very precise stuff to say that she overdosed him on cough syrup and then buried the body in a secluded place. I mean, we can't even say those type of details. It would be impossible really to say that without finding any sort of skeletal remains. That goes back into the same category that we said at the beginning, proving the unknown with the unknown. We don't know what happened to Timothy, so we're going to try and use this thing about, well, he was overdosed on cough syrup and she buried the body. All I said at the beginning of part 1 of these Timothy Pitzen uploads was that in the high-profile missing persons cases that we've reviewed, the overwhelming amount of theories is that if someone is missing for a very long time, they're most likely deceased. And I would stand by that. And that's all. We're not really getting anything more specific than that. And I think that's really going to be something we're just going to have to bear in mind when we're examining how we look at some of these true crime cases in the future. But when we're going to continue on here, the family talks about Amy Fry Pitzen's kind of a possible motivation for why she did what she did. And one of the biggest ones was divorce. Amy has this history of mental illness, and she believed that if she got divorced, she would lose custody of Tim. Timothy, that is, and Jim would gain custody of Timothy, sole custody, because of Amy's previous suicide attempt and her just being on medication, all of that. And that's not actually something that comes to us from Amy herself that she told her family or anything. That's just what the family believes happened. And it would be a very, very gruesome and dark and twisted thing for a mother to view her child and just be like, well, I don't want his father to get custody of him, so I'm going to have him murdered. I mean, or to murder him herself, even. That could be absolutely horrendous. I would just have to say, though, if Timothy is still alive, rather, where's the physical evidence? Like, it's a very perplexing mystery. But, like, we even have some of the things here about the note on the missing cell phone. It's like the family says that she adored her son and that there are indications that Timothy's disappearance was planned. Amy's cell phone showed pings off the towers near Sterling, Illinois. So that could be a place where we could start picking up on the map next time. And like I said, one of the things I want to do is kind of look at the map and kind of trace her steps or her driving path rather, and see where this could all end up. Sterling, Illinois could be a good place to investigate. And despite a massive effort early on, intense public publicity, and an extensive search for Timothy, the case went quickly cold. Okay, I think a lot of the reasons for that is this was heavily premeditated and heavily calculated, and it's the needle in the haystack. They aren't going to know where to look. It could be anywhere in those hundreds of miles that she was driving around. That's why her route was intentionally confusing. Continuing on here. There were, however, some revelations in the following years of the authorities that believed that they could have a lead to Timothy. In 2012, police released more surveillance footage that helped map Amy's final moves. In 2013, her cell phone was turned in. A woman had found on the side of the road in 2011, but had not realized its significance. Okay, those are the good things. Those are the very important things because that's just the hard evidence coming in. And we mentioned the case of Amber Tuckerow on the channel recently about how they had thousands and thousands of tips coming in, like 5,000 tips and suggestions about the case in Canada, and it didn't help. None of that helped. It was all just kind of like impractical information, and Amber's remains were found by just a couple of hikers in the woods. It's when people really stumble upon the hard evidence that gives kind of a breakthrough in the case. Ultimately, though, nothing came of it. Still, hope and headlines persisted. In 2015, police pursued a tip after a Florida caller said that there was a boy in her neighborhood who looked a lot like an age-progressed image of Timothy that had been produced by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The caller said that the boy had moved into her neighborhood soon after Timothy's disappearance, according to the Chicago Tribune. She said the family's vehicle had a Midwestern license plate and the boy never went to school. Aurora investigators agreed the boy looked a lot like the progression in the photograph, but it wasn't Timothy. That's one of the things that they did recommend, though. Like, if somebody did see anybody moving into their neighborhood who wasn't involved in school, that would be an absolute red flag where you would need to contact the authorities. It's one of the ways that case could be solved as well, if somehow somebody would recognize the age progression photo of Timothy. But I guess in that case, it just wasn't him. All right, but, that's an honest effort. That's not like a wild tip, or that's not the wild goose chase, or kind of one of the fraudulent things that people are putting out there to be intentionally deceptive. What I would just say with this one is, it's very confusing because whatever happened to Timothy must have happened in a very secluded area with very little physical evidence other than what is on the tires of the cars and the cell phone pings. Very, very perplexing. And this is going to be a very difficult case to crack, but once again, maybe we'll see what's around Sterling, Illinois. What do you have to say about the case of Timothy Pitzen? I would love to hear from you. And furthermore, this is part 3. It looks like we're going to continue onward and explore this case a little more. What do you think about the kind of just the plan and design of Amy Fry Pitzen, and Where do you think this is going to lead us? Murder or giving her son to a new family?